For my project, I decided to apply two theories to my life: Piaget's theory of cognitive development and Bem's theory of gender schema. Piaget outlines schemas as blueprints for actions or as building blocks for child knowledge. When a child discovers something new, it either assimilates it into a current schema or accommodates the schema to fit the new information. Piaget also developed 4 stages of cognitive development. The sensory motor stage is from birth to 2 years old. The most important characteristic of this stage is that the child learns that it is separate from the environment and discovers that actions cause reactions. The preoperational stage is from 2 to 7 years old, when a child learns to use language and symbols, but is still very egocentric. From 7 to 12 years old, a child is in the concrete operational stage, in which they can think logically about events, achieve conservation of weight, mass, and number. Finally, the formal operational stage stretches from 12 years old to onward. This stage is characterized by abstract thinking. In Bem's gender schema theory, a child gains a gender identity at around 3 years old. This entails a cognitive exaggeration of gender differences, an attraction to the in-group, and a homogenization of the out-group. Children also have a tendency to project stereotypes onto groups, which is motivated by cognitive consistency. Bem's theory helps explain how individuals become engaged in society and how stereotypes are shared. When I was around 2 or 3 years old, I had pneumonia and then bronchitis 2 other times, so I went to the hospital a lot to get shots and x-rays done. This created a schema associating lab coats with pain, and so it took me a long time to get over my childhood fear of people dressed in white. The schema even expanded to leaving my house at one point. I was nervous for a long time that we might be going to the hospital when we left. And so I assimilated people dressed in white into my schema for doctors. When I was also around that age, I talked to my mom, and apparently I really liked chewing things. This fits into the Piaget sensory motor stage because I made sense of the world through tactile discovery. Also around this age, my dad would set up general rules and common sense lessons, like don't use knives, and then he would let my brother and me roam and explore, and he wouldn't stop us from doing something that he'd already told us about. For example, one time he was ironing his shirt and told me not to touch the hot iron, but I did anyways, and he didn't stop me, but after that, I learned that you do not touch hot irons, and thus I learned through trial and error, which is another sensory motor characteristic. Once I hit preoperational, I began using objects as symbols. I pretended stuffed animals were my parents or brothers or other family members. I also had to have all my stuffed animals lined up on my bed because I felt bad if any of them were put away. I assumed that everything is like me, and if I can think and feel, so can the stuffed animals, which is the egocentric trait of the preoperational stage. I was kind of slow to learn to talk because my parents taught me in both Ukrainian and English at the same time, so I got confused a lot about which languages I should use where. But I still made steady progress in using symbols, such as words, which also ties into the preoperational stage. Another example of a schema I had was when I was around 4 years old. I would feed these squirrels that came up to our door with bread and cheese without telling my mom, and eventually I did let her know. And it really freaked her out because it turns out that they were really big rats, not squirrels, and I just accommodated my schema for squirrels to fit rats. Back to Bem's theory, at first I was going to talk about how I didn't fit into gender schema theory because I never really liked flowery, girly things as a child. But then I realized that it fit my life kind of differently because I was raised with 4 brothers and no sisters, so I adjusted to fit their in-group instead of a girl's for a lot of the time. And it turned out that whenever we moved, there happened to be more boys in our neighborhood than girls, so it wasn't until kindergarten that I began really identifying with girls. And so most of my childhood, I liked frogs, worms, and roughhousing, but as school progressed, I drifted more and more towards the girl in-group, which could mean I was androgynously sex-typed, meaning I processed and internalized traits and info from both genders, because I still watched TV and was affected by how the media portrayed girls. One particular memory I have that fits into this really well is when I was in about 2nd grade, when I went through a whole crisis about how I thought my voice was too low, because I had a schema for higher voices that I associated with girls, and I wanted to adjust to fit into the in-group. I don't remember much of being in concrete operational, probably because the line from when I changed from concrete operational to formal operational is kind of fuzzy for me. But thinking back to late elementary school and most of middle school, I remember being more mean to people who annoyed me than I would now, since I can put myself in their shoes much more easily. And I am now in formal operational, though again, I'm not sure exactly when I transitioned into it, but it's easy to think abstractly for me now. like with normal life situations or with school situations and etc.